The waiter smiled at my wife before he even looked at me. "Good evening. Reservation for Emily?" She frowned without missing a beat. "No, I don't think so. We've never been here." I almost corrected him, thinking he had confused us with another couple, but then he glanced back at the screen. "Emily Carter. Table by the window. You requested it earlier this week." My wife laughed awkwardly. "That's impossible. This is literally my first time here." The waiter looked embarrassed, apologized, and disappeared to speak with someone else. It should have ended there. People make mistakes. Restaurants confuse customers. Names overlap. That's what I kept telling myself while we waited. But something inside me shifted. Not because of the reservation. Because of the way Emily squeezed my hand under the table. Too quickly. Too firmly. Almost like she was trying to interrupt whatever thought had just begun forming in my head. We had been married for 11 years. We had 2 kids, a mortgage, predictable arguments about laundry and school pickups, and what I honestly believed was an ordinary marriage. Nothing spectacular. Nothing terrible. Comfortable. Safe. I thought we had reached that stage where surprises were mostly birthdays and forgotten anniversaries. Looking back, I realize normal can be the best disguise a secret ever wears. I wish I'd paid attention to how nervous she suddenly became. Instead, I smiled, accepted the new table the manager offered us, and convinced myself I was imagining things. That decision would haunt me for months. The strange thing is that, until that dinner, I would have described Emily as the most reliable person I'd ever known. She remembered everyone's birthdays. She called her mother every Sunday. She packed lunches for our kids before I even got out of bed. If someone had asked whether I trusted my wife, I would have laughed at the question. Completely. Without hesitation. Maybe that's why the little things never registered. She had started working later a few months earlier. Her company had landed a huge client, according to her. More meetings. More deadlines. More dinners with co-workers. I never complained because I knew what career pressure felt like. Besides, every time I apologized for feeling lonely, she'd kiss my forehead and say, "This is temporary. I'm doing this for us." Who argues with that? There were other changes too. A new perfume she'd claimed was a gift from a colleague. A sudden interest in wearing makeup even on grocery runs. She began locking her phone, something she'd never done before. Once, I jokingly reached for it to change the music while we were driving. She grabbed it so fast that she almost dropped it. Then she laughed. "I've got work emails. Confidential stuff." I believed her. Not because the explanation made sense. Because I wanted it to. Sometimes trust isn't built on evidence. Sometimes it's built on fear of discovering you were wrong about the person you love. A week after the restaurant, I told myself to let it go. Then my phone rang while I was at work. It was the restaurant manager. He apologized again for the mix-up and explained that he wanted to make things right by offering us a complimentary dinner. I thanked him, but before hanging up I casually asked, out of curiosity, how did my wife's name end up on the reservation? There was a short pause. She books with us fairly often. I felt my stomach tighten. I think you've got the wrong person. No, sir. Same full name. Same phone number. Same phone number. I couldn't speak. The manager kept talking, unaware that every word felt like another crack in my marriage. He mentioned that she usually requested the same quiet table near the window. Usually. Not once. Not by accident. Usually. I ended the call and stared at my desk for almost 20 minutes. There had to be another explanation. Maybe business dinners. Maybe clients. Maybe someone else made the reservations for her. I repeated every excuse I could invent. But none of them explained why she looked me in the eye and calmly said she'd never been there before. That lie hurt more than the reservation itself. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I started paying attention for the first time in years. Not spying. Just noticing. She smiled at her phone more often than she smiled at me. When a message arrived, she'd tilt the screen away without thinking. If I walked into the room unexpectedly, the conversation disappeared almost instantly. I hated myself for watching. I hated myself even more for finding reasons to keep watching. A few days later, she said she had another late meeting. The kids were already asleep, so I ordered takeout and waited up for her. She came home just after 10. Her hair looked freshly brushed, and she smelled faintly of the same expensive perfume she'd claimed was from a coworker. Long day? I asked. The longest, she sighed. I'd barely had time to eat. I nodded and said nothing. Later, while she showered, I noticed the receipt sticking out of her purse. It wasn't from the office cafeteria. It was from the restaurant. 2 entrees. 1 bottle of wine. Dessert for 2. The timestamp was less than 3 hours old. She had lied before walking through our front door. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured her sitting at that window table with someone else, laughing the way she used to laugh with me. By morning, I had convinced myself there had to be an explanation I simply couldn't see. So I did something I'd never done before. I checked our phone bill. I wasn't looking for proof of an affair. At least that's what I kept telling myself. One number appeared over and over again. Calls during lunch. Calls after midnight. Text messages almost every day. Sometimes dozens of them. The number wasn't saved in our shared contacts, so I copied it into a search engine. Nothing. Then I searched it on social media. A profile appeared. His name was Daniel. He looked ordinary, mid-40s, wedding ring visible in several photos, father of 2 daughters. The part that made my blood run cold wasn't his face. It was the picture taken outside the very restaurant where Emily claimed she'd never been. The date on the post was only 6 weeks old. She had liked it. Not publicly anymore. But just long enough for the activity to be captured in the screenshot someone had reposted. I carried that screenshot in my pocket for 2 days. Not physically, just in my mind. Every conversation with Emily felt unreal. We'd talk about groceries, homework, and whose turn it was to pick up our son from soccer, while all I could think was, "Who are you?" On the 3rd evening, I couldn't take it anymore. As soon as the kids were asleep, I placed my phone on the kitchen table. "Who's Daniel?" She froze. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. "Someone from work," she answered, reaching for a glass of water. "Then why did you tell me you'd never been to that restaurant?" Her face lost all color. I didn't think it mattered. It mattered because you lied." Silence filled the room. Finally, she whispered, "It's not what you think." I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because I'd heard those exact words in movies 100 times, and they always meant the same thing. She started crying before I raised my voice. "I was going to tell you," she said. The worst part was that I believed she meant it. Just not before she got caught. She kept repeating that nothing had happened at first. Those 2 words echoed in my head. At first. I asked her to explain, and for a long time she just stared at the table, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. Finally, she said Daniel had joined her team almost a year earlier. They started eating lunch together because everyone else worked remotely. Then they began texting about work after hours. Then about their families. Then about everything. I felt seen, she whispered. I didn't plan for it. I asked the question I had been avoiding. "Did you sleep with him?" She closed her eyes. The silence answered before she did. When she finally nodded, it felt like the room had tilted beneath me. "How long?" "A few months." "A few months." While we'd celebrated our anniversary. While we'd taken the kids on vacation. While she'd kissed me goodbye every morning. I couldn't connect the woman sitting across from me with the life we'd built together. She reached for my hand. I pulled it away. For the first time since we'd met, I looked at her and felt like I was sitting across from a complete stranger. The next hour turned into the ugliest conversation of my life. I wanted details, then hated myself for asking. Every answer hurt, but not knowing somehow felt worse. She admitted they had met at that restaurant several times because it was far enough from both offices that nobody they knew was likely to see them. The reservation had always been under her name. It was easier, she said quietly. Easier. That word snapped something inside me. Easier than what? Easier than telling your husband you were having an affair? She buried her face in her hands and sobbed. I never wanted to leave you. I couldn't understand how someone could betray me so completely while insisting they still loved me. Those ideas didn't fit together. She said Daniel had promised to end things with his own wife. He never did. Then Emily claimed she'd tried to break it off several times. Maybe she had. Maybe she hadn't. By then, every sentence sounded like another version of the truth instead of the truth itself. Trust had disappeared so completely that even her tears felt impossible to believe. The hardest part wasn't telling my parents. It wasn't calling a lawyer. It wasn't even sleeping alone in the guest room. It was pretending everything was normal for our kids. Our daughter kept asking why I wasn't eating dinner with everyone anymore. Our son wondered why Mom cried so much when she thought nobody was looking. We lied. We said I had a bad back and couldn't sleep well. We said work was stressful. We said adults sometimes needed quiet. Every lie tasted bitter. Emily begged me not to tell anyone about the affair. She said the children deserved stability. She said our families would never look at her the same way again. She wasn't wrong. But every time she talked about protecting everyone else, I wondered why protecting our marriage hadn't mattered when it could still be saved. I started seeing a therapist because I couldn't concentrate at work. Simple decisions exhausted me. I forgot meetings. I reread the same email 5 times without understanding a word. The betrayal followed me everywhere. Even ordinary moments became reminders that the life I trusted had been built on conversations and memories I could no longer believe were real. About 3 weeks after everything came out, another truth surfaced. It wasn't Emily who told me. It was Daniel's wife. She called me out of the blue after finding my number through social media. Her voice sounded calm, almost rehearsed, like she'd already cried herself empty before dialing. I think we should compare what we've been told, she said. For nearly 2 hours, we talked. Piece by piece, our stories lined up perfectly. The late meetings. The business trips. The same restaurant. The same excuses. Then she mentioned something that made my chest tighten. They've been seeing each other for almost a year. Almost a year. Emily had sworn it had only been a few months. When I confronted her that evening, she didn't deny it. She simply whispered, I shortened the timeline because I knew the real answer would destroy you. She was right. Every month she'd erased from the story represented birthdays, holidays, family photos, and quiet evenings when I'd believed we were happy. The affair hadn't happened alongside our marriage. It had quietly become part of it, and I had never noticed. After that, I stopped asking questions. Not because I had all the answers, but because every new answer made the past feel even more contaminated. I couldn't look at old family photos without wondering what had happened the day before or the day after they were taken. One Saturday, I found our vacation album in the living room. The kids wanted to remember the beach. Emily smiled in every picture. So did I. Looking at those photos felt surreal. I kept asking myself whether any of those smiles had been real. Had she texted him while I was building sandcastles with our son? Had she been thinking about him while we watched the sunset together? Those thoughts became impossible to stop. Emily noticed me staring at the album and quietly sat beside me. "I know I've ruined those memories," she said. I didn't answer. Because she had. Not intentionally, maybe. But permanently. The hardest thing about betrayal isn't losing the future you imagined. It's realizing someone reached back into your past and changed the meaning of moments you once believed were untouchable. That loss felt impossible to explain to anyone who hadn't lived through it. A month later, we started marriage counseling. It wasn't because I believed everything could be fixed. It was because I needed to know whether walking away would be giving up too soon or finally accepting reality. The counselor asked Emily a simple question. "When did you first decide to lie?" Emily stared at the floor for a long time. Before the affair became physical. The room went completely quiet. She admitted that the first real betrayal hadn't been sleeping with Daniel. It had been choosing to hide their growing emotional attachment instead of telling me she was unhappy. "I knew if I told the truth then," she said, "I'd have to make a choice. So instead," I replied, "you made the choice without telling me." She started crying again. By then, her tears no longer changed how I felt. I wasn't angry every minute anymore. I was exhausted. There is a strange kind of grief that comes from watching the person you loved become someone you no longer recognize. I realized I wasn't mourning only our marriage. I was mourning the version of my wife that, in my mind, had probably never existed at all. For a while, we tried living in the same house anyway. People kept telling us not to make big decisions while emotions were still raw. So we became polite roommates raising 2 children. We shared calendars instead of conversations. We discussed school schedules, grocery lists, and doctor's appointments with the efficiency of coworkers. Everything else stayed unsaid. Some nights I'd hear Emily crying in our old bedroom. Other nights she'd find me sitting alone in the garage long after midnight. Neither of us knew how to comfort the other anymore. One evening, our daughter asked if we were getting divorced. I looked at Emily before answering. She couldn't even meet my eyes. "We're still figuring things out," I told our daughter. She nodded, but I could tell she didn't believe me. Children notice far more than adults want to admit. After she went upstairs, Emily whispered, "I never wanted them to grow up in a broken family." I answered quietly, "Neither did I." The difference was that I hadn't been the one who broke it. Those words hung between us for a long time, and she never tried to argue with them. 6 months after the night at the restaurant, I signed the divorce papers. There wasn't one dramatic moment that pushed me there. No final argument. No screaming. Just a slow realization that I no longer felt safe with the person I had trusted most. Emily asked one last time if we could start over. She said she'd ended all contact with Daniel. She showed me messages, blocked numbers, and therapy appointments. Maybe everything she said was true. Maybe she had finally become completely honest. The problem was that honesty had arrived too late. "I forgive you," I told her. She looked up with a tiny spark of hope. Then I finished the sentence. "But I can't be married to you anymore." She covered her face and cried harder than I'd ever seen. I cried too. Not because I doubted my decision, but because it hurt to accept that love wasn't enough to rebuild what had been destroyed. Some things don't end with hatred. They end with exhaustion. By then, I had spent months carrying a weight that neither apology nor explanation could lift, and I simply couldn't carry it any longer.